Political Capital is brought to you by Uber Canada. Learn more at uber.com/flexibilityworks.
CHEK Podcasts.
Hey everyone, and welcome to Political Capital, your source for all the latest in BC politics. I'm your host, Rob Shaw, from the palatial CHEK News World Headquarters here in Victoria. We're going to cut right to it. We got a lot to talk about this week. Bringing in the pod squad to get through it. Reunited after a federal election campaign. Separated. We have Jeff Ferrier, Allie Blades, Jillian Oliver here, back together to break everything down. Hey everybody, thanks for being here.
Good to be back.
We should start, and I don't want to spend a lot of time on this, but we should start with Mark Carney visiting Donald Trump. We were all glued to the TV screens watching this. I think David Eby had a pretty good description when he was asked how he thought it went, where he said, well, that could have gone a lot worse. And I think that's probably true. But what did you guys think? Allie, what did you think when you watched how that played out?
Well, I think the whole goal was to not embarrass yourself. I mean, the whole goal of any meeting with Donald Trump is to not turn into a meme that then turns into international news. And Mark Carney, our prime minister, certainly did that. There are a lot of dynamics of, whether or not he accomplished what he set out to. But I think overall, the media on Monday before the Tuesday meeting was setting expectations low of this is going to be a long haul ahead of us. So it's not a surprise that nothing big came out of the meeting.
Right before they went into the meeting, I think the day before or that day, there was discussion of film tax credit, Jillian, that film tax tariff. Anyways, I don't even think Trump is clear on how it would work, but he would go after the film sector, potentially hitting BC's film sector quite a bit. So you had that dynamic plus the actual meeting. How do you think all that played out?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think, obviously they didn't talk about anything major of substance. That news is scary for BC. That's a really important industry for us. And I think, we've seen a lot of backtracking as the rubber has hit the road. Trump even said after those initial comments that he was going to consult the film industry. There's so many productions, big ones underway in BC that could impact. So I think, we just kind of have to see what happens. I think the meeting itself came at a time when the impact of a lot of these trade decisions from the U.S. is starting to be felt, and that's why you're starting to see some softening. And I think that played well into how the meeting went for Carney. I heard a really interesting anecdote after that when they had lunch. The president was asking Carney about all kinds of things about international affairs. I think it's obvious that he has some respect for Carney's authority on those issues, and I think that's good news. And we'll see what comes next with trade negotiations and what actually comes out of it.
He did seem very respectful to Carney. Jeff, did it almost go too well? Is there any risk, when someone looks like they handled the president properly, that eventually the narrative comes back to the president that he was handled, and then we look too good? Is that a possibility?
Yeah, when I'm on a first date and it goes well, I don't beat myself up afterwards for it going badly. It was a good first entry into the relationship with the United States for Prime Minister Carney. The election, he promised voters that who were afraid of Trump that they could have the comfort of knowing that they had a leader who would stand up to him and represent Canada well on the world stage. First meeting went well. Carney acquitted himself well, made a couple of points where it was an iron fist and a velvet glove around Canada not being for sale like the White House and Buckingham Palace. So, a good first meeting, but, actions speak louder than words, and we'll see if Canada can assert itself on the international stage and protect our industry, protect our communities, protect our jobs.
All right, let's move on to provincial affairs here. We had a lot of debate this past week about Bill 15, the new legislation to fast-track projects. Would let Cabinet designate certain projects from mines to mills to schools to hospitals as provincially significant, and then give ministers new powers to automatically issue permits or write new environmental assessments or even override municipalities to get things done faster. The Premier says it's necessary. He wants to get stuff done in the face of Donald Trump. Indigenous leaders say they weren't consulted. The Union of BC Municipalities calls it an overreach. And all political parties, including the BC Greens, opposing this. So let's start there. Jeff, I'm going to go to you first on this one.
Strikes me that Bill 15 is a modest proposal and empowers government to consider all projects submitted to government, public ones like hospitals and schools, private ones like mines, and decide which ones should be reviewed first. So a new hospital, a new school, critical minerals mine project, currently number 100 in the queue for review, could jump to the top of the list, while projects at the top of the list of less importance, for example, building docks on Pender Island, would go to the back of the line. So the goal here is to advance projects that will help BC fight back against Trump and his economic attacks on Canada. It strikes me that by opposing the legislation, the opposition is giving the government a gift here. With this, gives government the opportunity to say to voters, well, government took action to fight back against Donald Trump. The opposition parties did what Donald Trump wanted, which is to tie ourselves in knots, work against ourselves, and hold back development that would strengthen our hand in the fight against the U.S.
I have a rant on this.
Is it a rant where you agree with everything I've said, Rob?
No, it is not. This may surprise you on that. I don't. I'm just going to throw some stuff out here, and then we can talk about it here. I think there's a problem for government in a few ways here. Not consulting, co-developing this bill with Indigenous leaders, a foolish mistake for a government that set that out in UNDRIP. I don't understand why they sloppily overtook that issue. The second, I think it takes our current system of one set of rules for everybody, creates a new set of rules for certain projects chosen by politicians, and in the process makes that political, whether government intends for that or not. Why does one mine get chosen to be fast-tracked, but another doesn't? What if that mine has a well-connected lobbyist or NDP insider attached to it? Do you have to be on government's good side to get special treatment? Do you have to donate money? Do you have to agree to the province's terms? Do you have to stand beside the Premier and smile? I think government set itself up for political favoritism allegations here in the name of expediency. Jeff's taking notes now. Third,
writing down all your charges. I need to respond to them.
Third, it's a massive consolidation of power, just like Bill 7, into cabinet ministers. Instead of civil servants administering the environmental process, you have politicians who create new ones with their own timelines and their own people and they can even just issue it themselves, the permits. And I'm not sure that is the solution to delays in our system. It uses Donald Trump as cover, again, for steamrolling processes, which is an insulting and lazy communications narrative that creates this false binary choice of, well, if you don't support giving cabinet unfettered power to steamroll everything, you somehow don't support building schools in the face of Donald Trump, when that doesn't make any sense to me. And then just finally, I asked Premier David Eby on Thursday, would you be comfortable giving this type of power and system to, say, John Rustad or Christy Clark? Let them have these tools. And he said, well, you know what? Next government can pass its own laws. I'm not worried about that. But I would say, with all due respect, I think the point is not to pass legislation for your own partisan gain in the short term when you're in power. It's to improve the province for everyone into the future, regardless of the leader or the stripe. If you can't see giving your worst enemy on their worst days the law that you are passing to use, you probably have the wrong law. And I cannot imagine that New Democrats feel comfortable with John Rustad using the same cabinet powers they're giving themselves here to pick and choose projects. That is my rant concluded. Discuss amongst yourselves while I go have a smoke and a shot of whiskey on that. Jeff, we'll come back to you. I don't know, Allie, what do you think of the debate on this bill?
I mean, keep going, Rob, because I agree with everything. The whole time I was like, snap, good. All right, okay. But this is a problem for the NDP. This isn't a good look, especially after Bill 7, which would have also given the NDP more control and more power. I mean, I get it though, the NDP. Like, you barely got your electoral mandate, so now you're just tampering with the rules so that you can get some policy mandate and more power this way. But that's not how this works. And then the fact that they're even in more hot water because organizations like the First Nations Leadership Council said that this would be backsliding on reconciliation efforts. Also not great, not a good look. But you know, to what we're hearing from Jeff, and it's like they're building this narrative. The NDP are building this narrative of becoming the heroes of regulatory red tape. But in reality, given that this would be the ability to override rules and regulations, like, they just become like the supreme overlords of picking these winners and losers, as we've said, on the opposition side of things. John Rustad has even gone to say that this is mafia-style cash for access power grab, which I
just one step too far. One step too far, Rustad. But yeah.
And then let me, on a bit of a side note, indulge me for just a moment. I also just don't think that this is good politics for Bowen Ma, who's our Minister of Infrastructure. I think David Eby's doing her completely dirty on this one, because in one way, for her electoral success, because she's responsible for this file, we've seen this week, she's been put out on media quite consistently. She's going to become the face of this. On one side, she can say, I built hospitals and schools at record pace. But on the other side, if this doesn't go well, she's also the one holding the pen if a hospital is built with deficiencies or any backlash from additional First Nations groups. And so if I'm Bowen Ma, I'm taking a look at David Eby to be like, okay, I need to make sure that I come out of this in a place where I can get reelected, because right now we're on a trajectory of this is going to be really bad for the minister.
Jillian, what goes through your mind on this?
Yeah, I think that the politicization, the opportunity for even more politicization that there already is in choosing projects, is the one that is troubling for me. And, you know, I think asking the other parties or criticizing the other parties for not supporting this when they're being asked to give a blank check to just allow cabinet to pick and choose winners and losers, as Allie put it, is pretty extreme. And, you know, I think it's also the way that it's been communicated is a little bit dishonest. When you hear the premier talk, he says we need to get schools, we need to get roads built. Those are public infrastructure, but the bill goes so much farther than that to cover extractive, private, for-profit projects. And I think that is also, to Allie's point, a huge liability for voters that care about environment, for communities that care about the impact on their water and other natural assets that could be impacted by those kinds of projects. And, you know, it's really, I think, going to depend on how those projects are chosen and what ends up getting implemented. I think everybody supports getting schools and roads built quicker, but it's those private for-profit projects that I think have the greatest opportunity for controversy. Those are the ones that tend to be the most controversial with both First Nations and environmental groups. And it looks like this legislation is going to go ahead with just the barest of majorities, with the speaker breaking the tie. And I think, you know, we'll see in 3 years what the cabinet chooses to sort of use this for. And I think that'll determine, you know, whether or not it's successful for them politically.
We'll come back to the Greens opposing this on a confidence matter in a second, and maybe chat a bit about that. Jeff, back to you. Thoughts on?
A lot to unpack there. Wow.
You saw you scribbling away.
Yeah. You have 7 seconds.
I had to take notes about all the things that were said. On the issue of this is political liability for the government, I'll remind folks that 82% of the voters of British Columbia voted for parties in the federal election that promised to accelerate the review of economic development projects, and Mark Carney promised to create a process for programs of national significance. Corporations will not donate money to the government. That thing that Rustad said is silly, because it's illegal for corporations to donate money to politicians. On First Nations, the bill specifically says that nothing in the legislation takes away from First Nations constitutional and legal rights, and the Implementation Act says that explicitly, even if that weren't the case in this bill. There will be clear criteria and regulation that will be set in consultation with First Nations on which projects apply. We're fast-tracking reviews, not approvals. This is about getting projects to the front of the line for review. It's not tampering with any rules. It's moving projects. I just repeated the negative. I'm going to get skewered on media training for that.
Never acknowledge the question or the negative. Yeah.
On the environmental front, oil and gas and LNG are specifically excluded from this.
So government says. There's nothing in the legislation that says that. But
extractive for-profit projects like mines create an awful lot of jobs and economic investment that we use to spend on schools and hospitals and programs. And it's interesting to hear the Conservatives talk about how this is a huge power grab when they've promised to eliminate all but the most basic of environmental assessment rules and criteria as part of their Tariff Response Act. So all that said, I still think this is good policy, and it's good politics for the government to establish itself as the Trump fighters. And I will point out that if folks think that Trump is cover, Trump coming after us and us like tying ourselves in knots is like Connor McDavid coming down on a breakaway and pulling the goalie. It's silly. You got to fight back, and that's what BC's doing. And I think it's good politics and good policy.
I just don't understand how overriding a ditch permit for a school is fighting Donald Trump. Like government
because it's silly stuff like that, and we saw it in housing, that prevents building and investment and job creation and construction to start. And for folks who are worried about this overriding environmental and First Nations laws, if you talk to proponents of private sector investment, they want legally defensible permits. And any decision that government makes that seeks to override First Nation constitutional rights or environmental laws in the province, they'll get hauled before the courts and they'll get struck down. So this is very much just about let's prioritize which projects get reviewed first. And they may get approved, they may not get approved, but they'll get looked at faster and decisions made faster. That's what the government's trying to do here.
I'm assuming, like everything, no matter what, gets challenged in the courts these days. But if Cabinet does write, because this bill allows it to write entirely new environmental assessment processes for the project it deems significant, that's going to get challenged. And I just think it's going to be like, there's going to be a rough ride here anyways. Well, it's an interesting topic, Jeff. I appreciate you pushing back on it. That's
my job. Provide some contrast and insight.
I want to circle away from the bill to the sort of the politics of it a little bit. The Greens saying that they're not going to vote for this. It is a matter of confidence, technically. And I just want to go around on this Green deal with the NDP, because this is, I think, the third time the Greens have sort of, on a confidence matter, said no. And when you talk to them, they say, well, we don't agree it's a confidence matter. But I think technically the government decides what is a confidence matter. It's a fascinating sort of dynamic, Jillian. I want to go back to you first on this, because it's sort of, I'm not quite sure what the point of the deal was between the two parties for stability. If on confidence issues they're not always aligned, or maybe that's a value to the deal, that it's flexible like that. I don't know. What do you think?
Well, yeah, I mean, so I think that there are some bills that have to be confidence measures, like the budget and tax measures, basically things that have to do with finance and spending. And I think that that's what the Greens envisioned. The rules of the legislature are such that, because that's what actually provides, stability. The agreement was supposed to go bill by bill on legislation, and unlike the previous 2017 agreement, didn't obligate the Greens to support all government legislation. The rules of the legislature allow the government to designate anything a confidence matter, and that's what they're doing, sort of arbitrarily to bully the Greens to get political cover, and also to prevent the Greens from using any negative blowback from this bill, like I previously described, as a political contrast in the future. So I think it's pretty, and also, like with Bill 7, this asks the Greens to sign away their power and their legislative oversight. which I think, is unfair and also is not what people voted for. They voted for like a very, very bare majority. So I think, the Greens are totally within their rights. The NDP is trying to bully them with designating these bills as confidence measures, and they shouldn't.
Yeah, the Greens mentioned they tried to propose a change to this bill. The NDP said no dice on that. So, but so much for that. Allie, what do you think of this dynamic? Technically, even without the Greens, if we're assuming that the three independent Conservatives vote with the opposition, the NDP could still pass it, as Jillian pointed out, with the Speaker breaking the tie, which is not the way our system is supposed to work, but it works. But just the larger idea of the Greens and the NDP together and then continuing to split apart. I don't know what you think about that.
You're right. I mean, it's going to pass whether we like it or not. It's they have the votes, barely, but they have the votes. This is the start, I think, of the Greens pulling away from the NDP at all costs, though, because it's that reputational risk that they would have in aligning themselves with the NDP for future measures. And so this is definitely the start of it. I think for their electoral success, they would be smart, the Greens, to stay away from this, stay far, far away from this, because it's a huge electoral base, including First Nations, that they would potentially lose. And this is where it could potentially be very exciting for the Greens, because without those shackles of the NDP, they could then, push back a little bit and really see their stride and what they stand for. And I've said this over and over and over again, but I do think that the Greens really do need to shift in what their strategy is going to be on a single issue. And it wasn't on my bingo card because I thought it was always going to be an environmental thing, but this could very well be it.
Yeah, it is interesting. Jeff, what do you think of this emerging dynamic? Does it have any implications, or it just is what it is?
Well, I think the government will pass the legislation because it has 47 seats in an 83-seat legislature. It's a bare majority, but it is a majority. I think the calculus that they're playing here has nothing to do with bullying anyone. The opposition parties and that freedom group are free to vote however they want on their conscience on this. I think what the government is looking at is we want to get our economic legislation and measures, our Trump response, passed in a timely way. 82% of the voters in the federal election approved of this general direction. And despite what the thought leaders and the stakeholders and First Nations are saying, they're loud. The undercurrent is that the public is afraid of Donald Trump and they want to see leadership to defend British Columbia by the Premier and the government, and that's what they see themselves doing here.
All right. Okay, we have to leave it there. We're out of time for the TV version, YouTube version of the show here. Make sure you subscribe to the audio podcast because we have extra discussions this week on some other issues. Thank you to Jeff, Jillian, and Allie for being here. Thank you for watching. We'll be back next week with all the latest in BC politics here on Political Capital. Political Capital is brought to you by Uber Canada. Learn more at uber.com/flexibilityworks.